Okay, I'm Linda Bryan, Simple Life Center. We've been having tea parties for 2 or 3 years now. The dear Lord said, have them until the crowd swells. So we get our little idea and we figure it out and we ask people to come, and we've had some good times. You know, women, how we like to cry and stuff, so, you know, we get those heart stories, and you just have to keep looking at our website to see if you're going to cry the next one, or laugh, or, okay, we've got Emma today, and you all probably read the whole story, because I can't even begin to tell all what she can do, because I'm so excited about it. Yeah. There you go.
I'm Emma Bowers, and this is Nathan Montgomery, this is my assistant for today. So as I said, I'm Emma Bowers. I'm the founder and coordinator for the Cimarron Reenactors Guild of Guthrie. We are a group of reenactors and dancers. We most commonly reenact the Victorian era, which is the period between 1837 and 1903. Today we'll be talking a little bit about the Civil War fashion and etiquette. I'm only going to cover a little tiny bit because there's a lot. So I kind of just tried to squeeze it all into 10 minutes, but we'll try. So we're going to start off with the women's wardrobe. So the Civil War lasted from 1860 to 1865, but Oklahoma was not officially a state until 1907. This means that Oklahoma was not very developed and was still called the Indian Territories. All the influence for fashion from this time came from London and France, and Oklahoma was a very rugged place at this time, and it was usually about 10 years behind in fashion. So, which means that Oklahoma during the Civil War was still in 1850s. First, we're going to take a look at the dress styles of this period, and I'm going to go ahead and go over the base of a woman's wardrobe. So a woman's wardrobe always started with the same base, no matter what dress you were wearing. So the first thing they start with would be the chemise. So the chemise was mostly made of plain white linen and had short sleeves just like this, sat low on the shoulders to accommodate all necklines, and continued down to the knee. So this one actually goes, I'll show you, it goes down to about there. And this one is homemade, it's not linen. I was going to say it's a pillowcase, but it works. So, the next piece they had was the drawers or pantaloons. So they look a bit like this, a bit funky, but they're very comfortable, I can say. So the drawers or pantaloons came into existence with the introduction of the crinoline. So drawers became a necessity mainly for warmth. These drawers extended below the knee with a separate leg joined at the waistband, thereby leaving the center seam open. So mine are not open because we use them as in my group, and they don't really like that. So mine is closed. So the next piece they would wear would be the corset, and this is the corset. The main purpose for a corset was to help in shaping the figure in such a manner as to suit the desired dress or outfit. So for the Civil War, pretty much all of the Victorian era was to have very wide shoulders, so a lot of their seams in their shirts were dropped to about here, instead of here like they are today. So they wanted an hourglass figure, so very wide shoulders, very wide hips, and a teeny tiny waist. So every woman of repute wore a corset every day. There were even just corsets designed to be worn during pregnancy, which was probably not the safest thing, but that was their norm. So one of the things, there are lots of things surrounding corsets, and I can answer any questions you have about them afterwards, but a lot of the time, I hear a lot of people ask me, are they comfortable, and why do you lace them so tight? Because I actually am wearing one today. They are comfortable, I have to say, if they have the right boning material, that is here. If they're plastic, they're not comfortable. They usually, over time, melt, actually, and mold to your body in a very uncomfortable way. But if they have what's called spiral or flat steel, They are very comfortable, and they are actually kind of like wearing a back support. And they were not usually laced as tight as they could go. They were usually only laced just tight enough to give you that figure and to support your back and bust. So, so the next layer was the petticoats, which is right here. So they had 2 layers of petticoats. This is the first one. So a dual role was played with the petticoats as underclothing as well as a structural garment. As an undergarment, it provided much needed warmth and modesty. Additionally, it gave shape to the dress before the crinoline was invented. So the next was the crinoline, which is this one right here. So the cage crinoline first appeared in London, and they were commonly made with whalebone or stiffened horsehair. Mine is not made of horsehair, it's wire. And they were attached together by thick sewn tapes. So these crinolines gave free space to the ladies who previously had to wear several layers of petticoats. So you see how thin these are. They might have to get up to 10 to achieve the same volume that they would with just the crinoline. So crinolines, however, suffered various drawbacks. And many inconveniences involving open fires, stairs, and doorways. I can tell you when my ladies are trying to get dressed at my house, and when there's 2 trying to go through a doorway and they both have crinolines on, it doesn't work. even the guys, they just back up and they're like, you go. So during the Civil War, a woman in the upper and middle class may have up to 4 different dresses in a day. So there would be the morning dress, the walking dress, the visiting dress, and the evening gown. Now I will show you, I have a couple of them. So this is the first, it would be, let's see first. This is the morning dress. There can be 2 different styles. So they were just kind of loose, high-necked, long-sleeved, and they were mainly used for when you were meeting with your cook for the day, planning out meals, and when you're receiving close friends at home, just for visiting. So there's one of them, and mine has ties at the back to cinch in the waist. They were also worn with false collars and usually cuffs, so that they wouldn't have to wash the dress as much because their washing process was very rough. So if they had just false sleeves and false collars, those could be washed with all the other linens, and then you wouldn't have to, and they're much easier to replace than a whole dress. So, and they weren't usually trimmed. This was about it, and they barely touched the floor, just to be able to move. And they could very often be worn without a corset if the lady was staying at home. So her second dress of the day was the walking dress, which I have on today. It was mainly worn by fashionable ladies for strolls in the park or shopping trips into town. Mine is more Oklahoman, so it's a little bit more rugged, not very trimmed at all. And they were usually made of richer fabrics such as silk, satin, and cashmere. So her third dress of the day would be the visiting dress. The visiting dresses were even more elaborate than either morning or walking dresses. Skirts were trained and necklines were lower. In addition to being heavily trimmed and trained, they were worn for receiving visitors at home or for making house calls. So this would be if you were going to see a friend out in town, and this is a visiting dress right here. You can see it's a bit fancier than either morning or walking dress. It could be up to 65 inches in length. Mine is not, because these are 2 dresses that I frequently wear. So, and the formality of these dresses could differ depending on the rank of the person on whom the lady was paying her afternoon call. The more distinguished the personage, the more luxurious the dress. So her last dress of the day was the evening dress, and I do not have one of those with me today. I couldn't find it. So the evening dress was the most splendid of all of them. The sleeves of the dresses were generally very short for this time period, so they cut off just above the elbows. They were puffed usually, and the necklines were very low. and trains were very long. And these could be looped up if they were going to be dancing. Usually held and just tied up, and they could dance the night away. And these were usually heavily trimmed with lace, ribbons, and sometimes even false flowers. And as it started getting later in the Civil War time period, they would actually wear more elaborate petticoats, and they would sometimes loop these evening gowns up so as to see them. If they had a bright red petticoat, they might show those a little bit off too. So, I'm going to talk a little bit, here. And then they had their shoes. They would usually consist of short leather boots, like what I have on today. Or, for more fancy occasions, they would have very short silk slippers, very much like our modern day ballet shoes. So, in Civil War time, they did not distinguish between a right and left shoe. They made them all one. And there were no half sizes or varied widths beyond wide and slim. So you had a size 9 shoe, and it might be wide or slim, and you wouldn't really have anything else. And then a lady for accessories, she might have. I have a couple of hats. This is mine. She might have a little hat or a bonnet, or sometimes for Civil War time period, it was very common to have a lace piece on the back, clipped to the back of the head. So in my case, I use a doily because it works. And then she might have knit gloves, or what we call kid gloves. Kid gloves were usually made of some very fine, soft leather. So they look a lot like this, just leather gloves. So for the men's fashion, I'm going to talk a little bit about the everyday man, and because there's so much info already surrounding a soldier's uniform. So for the men's fashion, they didn't have quite as much of a base as the lady, which can be. So first they had the shirt. So it was usually, it was usually made of cotton or wool, and those of high social status wore white shirts. Those in more rural communities wore darker colors, and the collars were usually high and shirts buttoned up the front. So next you would have the suspenders. You can see they're right there. And those are attached to the pants with buttons, and there are leather strips attached to them. So then you would have the trousers. The trousers were usually made of thick cotton, canvas, or wool. These are thick cotton. And zippers had not yet been invented, so they were done up with metal buttons, usually on the sides, and usually had a small cinch in the back. And next you'd have the vest or waistcoat, and this was usually made of wool or canvas, was buttoned up the front, and did not usually match the trousers. So your next piece would be the overcoat, which is this one. The overcoat can be varying in lengths and styles, depending on the occasion and weather. So it was usually darker in color and made of wool or canvas. So if you were going to a ball, you might have one that was almost floor length. If you're going for a stroll around town, you might have one that's short. And then next thing would be the hats. So there were a couple of different kinds. So the hats of this time were very different depending on personal choice or job of the individual. So for example, a working man out in the field might have something much like our modern day cowboy hat, which I have one right here. So something like this, or what we call a railroad cap, so much like a paperboy hat almost, with a little bit more stiff sides. So if they were out in the field, they might wear a cap, something like our cowboy hat, or a railroad cap, or a round straw hat. So for some fancier occasions, they would wear silk or felt top hats or bowler hats. So this is a silk bowler hat, or a felt bowler hat. and that would be a top hat over there. Okay, so you can have a seat. Thank you. Just as with the ladies, the men had a few different outfits or suits for the day, depending on what they were doing or what their social status was. So, but they usually only had one, maybe two, sometimes three if they were upper class. So a working man would only have one outfit for the day usually, and this would usually be muted in color, very more rugged looking, and it would usually be wool or cotton. Dark shirts, dark vest, dark jacket, and they would usually have shorter jackets. Okay. So then a man of middle or upper class would usually have a nice suit, usually black and very clean. As you can see, his suit is mostly black. And then usually the third of these outfits for the day would be a riding outfit, and these would traditionally be worn by those of the upper class because not everybody has time to change. And then men's shoes would be short leather lace boots. Something like this. So short men's boots. Or they would wear very tall leather ones that came up over the knee, generally used if you were riding or walking. So these are actually a pair of soldier's boots. These are cavalry boots for riding horses. So, alright, I think that's all for the fashion. Does anybody have any questions about the fashion? I have not covered.
I always have a question about how they kept the bottom of the skirts clean, because they didn't have paved roads and
Yeah.
I guess if you change your clothes 3 times a day.
That does happen. A lot of it was just spot cleaning. They often didn't wash the whole outfit.
So like the lady, would it be unladylike to, pick up your skirts so that you don't drag it through the mud?
Slightly. That's why most of them didn't, like the walking suits, didn't touch, like mine doesn't. But
So
in the
it's not
back
dragging.
it doesn't drag.
You
But
mentioned
could-
trains though, trains drag.
They could. That's why I usually had a visiting dress. You had different dresses if you were going to visit somebody and if you were going for a walk. It really just depended
In Little
on.
Women, I just saw that, they would pick theirs up, and they did not like that mud. They would calculate things in a way, oh no, not today, it's all muddy out. So they didn't want to clean
Oh
the
no.
mud out of those dresses.
It's much easier to clean the shoes and the dress. But yeah, you could pick it up, but the main thing would be not to show your knees.
Right.
Preferably not your ankles either, but if you're walking, any other
So I'd like to see that cowboy hat on him.
I don't know, does it fit you?
I don't remember.
Just that.
But
Yeah.
I think it's a little small for him, but
Get the idea though.
Yeah. Is the top hat traditional top hat?
yeah.
yes, it
Squared
is.
on top.
And it also, this one's slightly big for him, so he's wearing the one that fits him today. But this is the
Yeah.
other
That's evening, right?
evening or even walking sometimes.
Did they dance as much as we think they did? How often? And I mean, they seemed like when you read about it that
I'm actually going to cover that in the next part a little bit. For dancing, they did dance quite a bit, but when they did, they held huge balls. And when they say they lasted all night, that means usually in a huge house, your guests stayed overnight. And they might dance from 6 in the afternoon until 1 in the morning. And then everybody went to bed and left the next morning.
and that was mainly
The upper class.
that kind of dancing.
Yes.
What? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yes.
Were there any common accessories besides hats, and gloves were, was a walking stick standard for a man? Was there
A walking stick
handbags
was
for
pretty
women?
standard.
What? Yeah.
For a man, a walking stick was usually one of the only ones. He might have a handkerchief sometimes, usually to offer a lady. For a lady, yes, I actually do have one here. A handkerchief would be very common. And then some different, they might have a handbag such as this one with just a clasp, and this one actually has, so let me see. This one actually has a little mirror inside. Just in case. And an inner coin purse.
I think we had a pattern. I made my first walking dress, and I think on the pattern, her stick, they actually had a little thing on the bottom of the dress that they could hook onto the stick.
A little loop.
Yeah, okay. You've seen that?
Yep. And then I have another example of a little purse right here. So this might be for an evening gown. That way you can hook it around your wrist and continue dancing throughout the night.
Don't lose your credit cards that way.
Yeah.
Or your cell phone.
Did they use pockets very often? Did they use pockets in their clothing?
They did. Which is so amazing because pockets today just do not have.
We, a couple years ago, visited an old Civil War home, and I thought it was really interesting thinking about the modesty. The front entrance, they had a staircase, but one on the left and the right of the front door. And one was for the women and the other was for the men, so that the men that might be following, or a man that might be following a woman wouldn't see her ankles as she was going up the stairs. So it was a totally separate. So covering
And that was in a museum?
No, it's just a Civil War home in Texas.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just really.
I wonder if that was in any of the churches.
Yeah.
You know? Oh, that's interesting.
But I think their pocket design is wonderful. I'm always saying
There's
I
a
need more
law.
pockets.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I
go
can't
ahead.
hear very well. There's a law in Guthrie, and that it's still on the books where you have to be covered up. And this is just a little Linda thing. I saw all the kids running, you know, the team down the street and everything, flopping and blopping and everything out there, you know, and I'm like, there has got to be something. And I look over and this man is like, oh, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I called Jason Murphy and he says, oh no, you can't dress like that in downtown Guthrie. I mean, it's covered.
That's where they jog.
What?
That's where they jog.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do.
Through the
I
high
called
school, then they go down Division.
them. But they have more clothes on, I noticed.
That's good.
They didn't have hardly anything on, and that's just not necessary.
No.
But that's what got me curious about it, and so he looked it up, and
We have a lot of odd rules in Guthrie.
We do.
You can't walk backwards eating a hamburger.
I did not know that.
We have a lot of odd rules in Guthrie.
Who made that rule?
I was reading that.
Really?
yeah, those rule makers are so proud of their laws that they get in. Where's his name?
You know how they made that rule during the Pi era? Because Wednesday was trying to do that.
Who was?
Wasn't his name Wednesday? Do you remember the Pi?
Popeyes.
Wednesday, I'll pay you next Wednesday for the burger that you want it to be
The
today.
hamburger,
Makes me kind of want to try it, just see what would happen. That'd be such a strange thing to go to jail for. Would
yeah.
it not be like,
I think in
You
Norman
could
you're not
ask.
allowed to have a potbelly pig.
Paperwork for that one. It's too much paperwork. In your town?
so I just have a little tiny bit about the etiquette and some dancing, a little bit. Some of the etiquette for the Civil War period was quite strange. So here's some examples. So some of the basic recommendations for individuals to display correct manner included never to keep one's hat on in the presence of a lady. Not to fall asleep during the day in one's clothing. Don't take naps, apparently. Don't tilt one's chair, not to touch one's partner they are conversing with, and you are never to grab a lady by the waist, or in general touch them. and not to make fun of those who bathed and washed regularly. This is what I stumbled across that I had to dig into a little bit. So it was not until the 1850s that regular personal washing became a routine in the middle-class households. So cleanliness ranked as a mark of moral superiority and dirtiness as a sign of degradation. And it was just seen, like they had to make it a rule that you couldn't make fun of those who bathed and washed regularly. So relationships between men and women played an important role between them. In the Code of Good Manners, when women were involved in conversations with gentlemen, they were never to ask them about their health. Gentlemen were advised never to ask a lady a question, period. Don't ask a lady a question. And if they wanted to give a particular gift to a lady, a bouquet of flowers or a book was the only suitable gift. The slightest contact, however, was to be avoided between ladies and gentlemen in public. Dancing was probably one issue that caused the most problems. Men and women were simply kept apart as much as possible. The only body part that was allowed to be touched during a dance was the elbows. That was it. So you could touch elbow to hand. That's it.
Wow. We've come a long way.
A bit. And how we see mainly when couples dance, the gentleman usually puts his arm around the lady's waist. That was not acceptable. It was just,
He held her elbow.
he held about here, yeah.
Okay.
So when they were dancing, would you say that for me? So a lot of times for the waltzing, it would actually be like, it would actually be like this. Or if they were to dance like this, it would be here. That's what you do. So other etiquette enforced upon women included never allowing anyone to help her with her coat or shawl, because heaven forbid somebody might touch the lady. The tea party etiquette of that time was usually very simple until it came to conversations for what you could talk about and what you couldn't. But the etiquette of the general tea party was quite simple. When drinking tea, you always lift the saucer with the teacup. When stirring your cream and sugar, never let the spoon clank along the side of the cup, and never pour the tea for yourself. So this means if you were the hostess, you would pour your tea for everyone else, and then you would ask someone else to pour it for you.
Oh my goodness. I'm full, thanks.
That's all I have for today, and if you all have any questions or comments, please tell me.
Would you tell us about what the awesome thing that you did at Christmas time downtown, and then also your more recent experience with the Civil War reenactment?
Yeah.
Did you guys go that way?
We did.
Tell us about that.
So I just kind of got a group together. I've always been really into the Victorian time period, reenacting. I've been reenacting since the day I was born. Literally have pictures of like a couple months old. I'm in a reenacting dress, and we're at a reenactment. So
In the family.
in the family, yes. My grandma passed away a few years ago, and she left me all of these costumes. There were probably 40 costumes of various pieces and mix and match stuff. And I kind of just really wanted to get back into that, because after she died, my family just kind of dropped the reenacting. But I wanted to continue, so I picked out a window downtown and kind of just talked to the chamber and said, hey, can you find out who owns this, because I really want to sit in this window. And that's what we did, and then I got a group of, I think, 5 girls my first year. And we all
Speak up a little bit.
So my first year, I got about 5 girls to come and sit in this window with me, and we crocheted, we sang, a couple of girls did embroidery, and we just had little snacks and some tea, and just good fellowship, pretty much. I think I had one girl who, she read out loud to us. And then it just kind of got bigger and bigger. I think the second year I had 10 people, and then this past year was my 3rd year, and I had 24. It got big. And I had actually quite a few guys who decided they wanted to join in. And then we kind of decided we don't really like, none of us are we don't have rhythm when we're dancing. So having to do the tradition, like the old-timey contra dancing and line dancing, you don't really have to have rhythm as long as you can do the steps. So what we did is we just got together a few times and I taught them all these dances after learning them at Civil War reenactments and just other places that you could, homeschool dances even. And then we just kind of picked out a few, practiced them a bunch, and then we actually, during Victorian walk, I had half my group sit in the windows for half the night, and then the other half switched for the rest of the night. Well, in that transition, to make it look a little bit less crazy, we actually danced for about an hour, and we did quite a few waltzes and reels and just...
Where did you do that? Because I didn't see that.
So we actually did it, what street is that?
Corner of
In the
Oklahoma
street.
and First, in front
Oklahoma
of
First, yeah.
the old Lentz building.
Across from the post office.
Yep.
In the street?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh,
Yep.
That's gonna get bigger.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That sounds so much fun.
It was, and I found a friend. And
Don't give up on that.
I will not.
You'll
It
even
is
get
so
me
much
down there.
fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
What a wonderful thing that must be to see. I mean, that's lovely.
Well, and tell them what your scenes were, and you had like 6 windows? Because the Lentz building, you know,
Before.
it's empty. And
Yeah.
they've always had empty
Yeah. So we actually,
things since I've been here anyway.
Mr. Ladd let us come in and actually kind of look at all his antiques that he had. And then he said, you know what, if you'll set up a display for the month of December, you can use it. So we brought in, we pulled some old chairs from the back, and I think the display is still set up actually. But we pulled some old chairs, I brought in a couple of my buffalo rugs, and just little trinkets that might make it look. I think we had a deck of playing cards, we had a couple of lanterns, just little things like that. So for our first window, I'm an artist, so I see things in color, so we kind of started with a color base. I knew I wanted pastels in the first window and the second two to be darker and red and brown, and then the last to be blue and purple. So that's exactly what happened. Is the first one had pink and gold chairs, and they were pastels, and it was our tea party window. And I had a few of the nicer, just depending on what the people were wearing, I would go and they could just go and play games and talk for a couple of hours and just have good fellowship. And then for our second window, we had, I called it my saloon window. We had a couple of the rougher looking guys and some of the girls actually sit in that window and they played cards, and it probably looked like they were playing poker. They were probably playing Go Fish. Bottles sitting out there that looked like beer bottles, but they were water is what it was.
You were acting.
We were acting, yes. And then for our third window, I don't even know, I think it was like my dinner window is what I called it, because it was set up for 2 people to have dinner, and that's what I did. I had a couple go sit in there. We actually sat in there for one of the times. My grandparents sat in there for one of the times. My mom and dad sat in there for one of the times. And they just, I think my granny, she quilted, and we just had little random projects going on.
That is so marvelous.
That is awesome.
And then for our fourth window, it was our artistic window. So any of the girls who, I had one girl who came in and did watercolor paintings. And then I actually had 2 of my guys brought guitars, was one of them. And then we had 2 girls go and sit in there, and we sang out of an old hymnal, and they played guitars for us. And then odds and ends, I had a couple of girls embroidering and crocheting and knitting. I think one girl knitted a scarf while she was in there. She sat in there so long, she was like, why not? So, but yeah, that's what we did, and it was lots of fun. And
Very good.
Good way to pass on the traditional stuff of Guthrie.
that's what I saw, is that the reenactors are it's kind of a dying tradition, which is really sad to me, because
Younger generations participating in that. That's great.
my group, I tell you, my youngest in my group is 5 years old. It's actually his little sister. And the oldest person in my group would be my granny and grandpa. so 70s. So I have all age group, but my main age group is from the ages of 14, well I guess 12, because my brother's 12, and the biggest age group there, and then 21, so 12 to 21. But a lot of them are around the ages of 16, 17, 18, something like that. So a lot of them they're learning more, and I am able to, because I've done so much research and have been raised into it, I'm able to give them more info about it. And a lot of them were not history nuts as I am, but I'm starting to, you gotta present it in a fun way. So I'm showing them some history in a fun way. And they're learning now.
Would you consider giving lessons? Even if we had to pay you?
On what would you want to give lessons on exactly?
There's so many.
There's so much.
Dancing.
Dancing?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, definitely.
So we wouldn't feel, so we could feel a part right from the get-go.
Yeah,
And,
definitely. It is a closed group, but I do have application forms. And if
Okay.
any of you are interested, the main thing I have to say, I'm short on guys. Because the guys think they don't want to do it, and then I had a few come into it and say, I'll come reenact with y'all as long as I don't have to dance. Now they're some of my best dancers, and they love it.
Had you ever thought about taking it into the schools, like for History Month or something like that?
I hadn't, actually. This is kind of my first real
That would be
structured
like for
And then if
April.
you went to like,
For the 89ers, in April, you could do something like that.
Yeah, I planned on dressing up and walking around for 89ers actually, and just,
But they do the second grade group, I think, and the third graders do the land run. And that week, the week of the chuck wagon and all the land run stuff, you could go into the schools.
the high
and
schoolers
see
might
something.
be real interested too.
Yeah.
yeah. Definitely.
Just because of chance, we ended up with mostly homeschoolers.
Yeah.
So that we just had never even thought about looking into things like that. Not that we're against it, just that it never really crossed.
They have theater classes at the high school, and I'm thinking those dramatic people could learn a thing or two.
It is a lot of fun because I encourage a lot of my reenactors to come up with a persona. So for mine, if somebody asks me on the street what my name is for costume, I'm Emma Prairie. That was part of my, I actually had a lady in my family named Emma Prairie.
Can't hear you. Speak up, please.
I had a lady in my family named Emma Prairie, so that's what I use. That's the name I use when I'm reenacting. And just they can come up with little characteristics. If they, I think I had Joseph did he had an accent for his person. And they can just come up with different little things. They can come up with a different background if they want. It's lots of fun. And just getting people to realize it's not all, the dress code might be a little strict, but you have a lot of freedom within it once you know the parameters. And we did go to we've been to 2 reenactments now with my group. We did the Battle of Honey Springs in, where is it?
September, and it's out in East Oklahoma, almost
Yeah.
to the Arkansas border.
Yeah.
Like that.
It was a lot of fun. It was kind of a smaller reenactment, but it was still a lot of fun. They had a battle that they reenact, and it's about probably an hour, 45 minutes long, something like that. And then you can go and ask the reenactors any questions you want. They bring in real cannons, and they fire them off, which is awesome. Their cavalry was a bit small this year. They only had 3 of them, but that's still pretty cool to see horses galloping. And I have to tell you, one of the funnest things to watch is trying to, like, them dying, because it shouldn't sound like that, but it is kind of fun because they try to be real, but they're not always. So a lot of them get, a lot of them get, exactly, a lot of them get really into it and really dramatic, so they might go screaming to the ground. And it's interesting to watch. And then a couple of, like, the older guys, I have to tell you, a lot of them accidentally die in the shade. I even watched.
Accidentally die with their hat over.
Yes, I watched one of them. He died. He backed himself up against a tree, slid down the tree, sat, and I actually watched, and somebody had to come shake him awake afterwards because he had fallen asleep taking a nap. It was a lot
Do
of fun.
do you remember the 4 guys that we had at the farmer's market, and they
The
would
gunslingers, the gunslingers?
Oh.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, the gun-
if you
gun
got up real
fighters.
close, you would hear some words when they were hitting that submit. Oh, it was really, but they did a good job too.
So my dad was a cavalry rider for a long time, from like the age of 13 to 20, 24 or something like that. And he reenacted right alongside my grandpa, my chappie, that's what we call him. So he was actually showing us the other night, because I was telling him about the reenactment of Round Mountain, and he was showing us how they used to die. And Mom had to ask him, "Are you sure you can still pull this off?" And he did. And so he actually slams himself onto the ground and does a barrel roll and lands with his feet where he's on his stomach. And it was quite interesting to watch.
Oh, I think you got a picture of it.
I didn't, but it was really interesting to watch. He's like, he did say it's much nicer on grass because I can go down a lot faster. He said they had to have lessons for this in their reenacting group for a long time, teaching the guys how to die. Because he said they had one guy, no matter how much they taught him, he would always go stiff as a board and just fall over backwards and knock the air out of himself. So just the things that have to be taught is quite interesting. But
I went to that about 15 years ago, and they had a lot of courses, and I mean, it was pretty big.
it's died down a little bit.
And I thought it was interesting that they said, at that time, they reenacted it, of course they have history, but then they would change it so that the other side could win, so that if they did it again tomorrow. So,
Yeah.
is that right? So like the Union won one day, and then the South won the other day.
A lot of times, so for what happens usually for reenactment, it's a 3-day thing. So they usually start on Friday, and they have education, and they bring in the schools from